Today was the first day of school for 80,000 students here in Baltimore. And for the first time in 20 years, there's new leadership in the Teachers Union. Baltimore City Schools have faced a lot of challenges and has been fighting to improve the school system for dozens of years. Hopefully now with this new leadership, we will see some changes and some solutions to these challenges. But before we go any further, let's look at this package that we have that will give you an overview of what some of the problems are.
Across the country, a new wave of young progressive leaders with a bold vision have been shaking things up and knocking off incumbents that have been in power for decades. Here in Baltimore, Diamond Tay Brown challenged and defeated the incumbent Teachers Union president, who had first been elected more than 2 decades ago. Brown and her Union We Deserve coalition have been involved in activism around the school system for years, and they used this experience to help convince voters they would do more to take on some of the huge challenges city schools face.
This journey started with me being a member of the Be More Caucus, which is a caucus of the Baltimore Teaches Union. We consider ourselves an organizing caucus because we are all organizers in addition to being educators. And we believe that organizing is a key tool in obtaining justice for our students.
In June, the National Union, American Federation of Teachers, held an investigation and ultimately ruled the election will be upheld.
While some may see a contentious election as an indication of disunity within the union, it actually shows how important the union is to so many people. And the challenges reaffirm that we are all committed to the democratic process.
The new leadership, led by Brown, a former middle school teacher and activist, have been in power for a few months, but they have been busy, raising nearly $7,000 to buy fans for classrooms without adequate air conditioning, and turning out hundreds to the Board of Education to oppose changes to the teacher evaluation system that would allow administration to perform unannounced evaluations. Baltimore schools continue to underperform compared to other districts. Critics like Governor Larry Hogan say that's because schools are mismanaged. State Commission studies have found schools statewide are underfunded by billions every year. The Kirwan Commission recommended increasing school spending to ensure students have access to a 21st century education. Hogan says he won't increase taxes to pay for it. That's part of the reason the ACLU and NAACP Legal Defense Fund are suing to force the state to adequately fund all schools. This is Deshauna Bryant, a plaintiff in the case.
It has a terrible impact on Baltimore City public school students because everyone wants to judge us, how they don't think we're the best students, how we're not up there in test scores and everything, but we can't have the best test scores, we can't be the best students if we're not put in the proper environment. If we have to leave every single time it's cold, if the building has to be let out, or if we have to leave every time it's too hot to stay in the building, or if our teachers don't have enough materials to teach us the proper things, it makes it hard to be these students that everybody wants us to live up to be.
For The Real News, this is Jessel Noor.
Okay, joining me now are 3 guests. Diamond Tay Brown is the new president of the Baltimore Teachers Union. She's a graduate from City College, and she's spent her life in the educational system here in one capacity or another. So now she has the ability to address some of these challenges. Also joining me is John Gray. He's a high school student from the Bard High School. He's a youth organizer for the Algebra Project, and he's been involved in the challenges of the education system for quite a while. And also joining me is Angela Campbell. She's been a school teacher for 13 years. I think her last position was at Henderson Hopkins. She is now moving to North Avenue. She takes 14 years of experience in the school system with her, and she's going to be faced with the task of trying to figure out how to make the Board of Education, which is on North Avenue, how to make that work. Welcome Angela Campbell also. I want to start with John. This is your first day of school, and you've been involved as a youth organizer in the school system for some time. So you're more concerned, you're not just concerned about your grades, but you're concerned about the school system. What is it that you feel is the issues from a youth perspective?
I think it's like a disconnect. I think we all know that it's high school, or the purpose of high school is to train you to come out and be prepared for life. I think an aspect that high school lacks is this organizing component. This idea of advocating for yourself, and that everyday stuff is organizing, whether it's light at your corner is broke and you go out and you do whatever, you use whatever channels you got to use to get it fixed, or whether it's, your school is improperly funded and you and some students come together and you do a rally, or you do a drive to gain those, to fix your problems, right? All that stuff is organizing. I think it's not taught in classes. It's not a part of the culture to organize and advocate and be aware of your power in spaces, compared to math. You feel me? That's a understanding. That's what you got to do, but those things are equally important.
Okay, thank you. Now, around the country in the last several years, there's been kind of uprisings from teachers' unions. Obviously, teachers are not paid properly for the tasks that they are mandated to do. That's raising the future leaders of America. That's one of the problems. So teachers' unions in California, in Colorado, et cetera, has been pushing forward new demands to get funding, not only just to pay the teachers, but supplies, et cetera. So now what we see here in Baltimore is young teachers that's been organizing and that's trying to raise these issues here for our students. So what's your intention? How do you intend to meet some? What are the challenges, and how do you intend to meet some of them?
Well, I think the challenges are that we don't allow teachers to just do their job. Most educators, they know exactly what they need to do to meet the needs of their students. But as the experts, when we ask for what we need to meet the needs of our students, there's some type of pushback that we get from people that don't have to face our students every day. Another issue is that a lot of administrators and different school districts think that the way to retain educators is to pay them more. No educator, no great educator is going to trade dollars in for watching their children suffer. And that's what we're being asked to do. We're asked to take this paycheck that's supposed to keep us quiet about what's really going on with our children. And I think one of the other challenges is a great big challenge is that there has been a culture of fear and retaliation created in the Baltimore City Public School District. So no one wants to be a whistleblower. No one wants to hold their peer accountable. No one wants to say what's really going on in their schools because they fear that they'll lose their job, they'll be transferred to another school against their will, or somehow their position will be compromised. Therefore, once again, our students get left unsupported and without what they need because adults and rightfully so, but adults are more concerned about keeping their job than they are about, no one wants to put themselves out there on a limb at the expense of them losing their job. And so, but at the same time, we're in a position, I believe we're in a state of emergency as far as Baltimore City Public Schools are concerned, and we need people that are going to be willing to go out on that limb and risk that, take those type of risks like losing your job and being transferred to another school to save our children. I don't think we're there yet. But there are so many other ways we can get there. And like John mentioned, one of the greatest ways is organizing. We need organized people and we need organized money. And I think that we've allowed the powers to be to keep that separate, which it diffuses it simmers down our power.
Okay, are you finished? Angela, you're going to North Avenue. North Avenue, everybody in the city know North Avenue is the place that runs the school system here in the city. So what are you going to be doing there? And what's your plans for making some changes?
To address your question, I have the opportunity to really be impactful when it comes to teacher development, professionally and educationally, and really to make sure that the programming that we're offering our staff members really trickles down and really impacts our students. I think there has been a lack of focus in the past, and we really have an opportunity now to really elevate the work that has been done previously to really make sure it's really being impactful so that our students are ultimately the ones who are gaining the opportunities and the improved instructional capacity of our teachers as well.
Okay, well, this is a follow-up.
Sure.
I think last week there was a gathering of teachers at North Avenue in reference to a new policy that the Board of Education is trying to put out, unannounced formal evaluations of teachers in their classrooms. What's your position on that? And the vote hasn't came through yet. It's coming through next week, I understand. But what's your position on that? Principals walking into a classroom unannounced and then evaluating the teachers.
Well, from my point of view, I think all teachers want to increase their instructional capacity. We're here to serve our students, and we want all our students to be successful. But we want to make sure that it's a fair, equitable process to evaluate teachers, and that all stakeholders are at the table to be able to develop whatever instrument or whatever process that would include. So again, we want to be impactful. We want to make sure that our students are successful, but it needs to be a fair process when it comes to that. And teacher, educator, parent, student voices need to be heard when it comes to informing what that process looks like.
Okay, so now over the summer months, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Over the summer months, I understand that this new rebels, new Turks, new leaders of the Teachers Union, along with the Algebra Project, have raised $7,000 to put fans in the classroom. One of the problems have always been if the temperature reaches a certain level, the schools got to close down, the students got to go home, they miss that kind of time there, as you've seen from the report. Did you lead this effort, and why? And why did you have to?
Well, just last year, I was a teacher at Booker T. Washington Middle School, and I didn't have air conditioning or a fan, and my windows only opened halfway. So me and my students actually experienced firsthand being extremely hot, trying to learn, me trying to teach. It was very uncomfortable. And I would ask for resources from my administrator, and I didn't get them. And I was adamant last year about not being that teacher that's going to resource my school and my classroom with what my administration should be resourcing my school with. And that's a very difficult point to get to as an educator, because initially you're thinking, I need to do whatever I need to do to give my kids whatever they want. But what you don't realize is what you're doing is you're giving administration and a district an excuse to not do what they're supposed to do. So since you're going to supply everything and you're going to make your classroom cute and great, we're not going to. And so I took a stand last year and I explained to my kids, we're going to be in here hot. I'm going to bring my fan from home. But what you all are going to do is you're going to tell your parents how hot it is in my classroom and tell them what the problem is. And, you know, we're going to suffer through this together, but we're not going to continue to do all of this, these extra things that we're being asked to do, and we're not being respected as students and as teachers and as educators. And so when I became the president, one of the first things I thought of was, what are we going to do for educators when the school year starts? Because they're going to be hot. And I know that there's a long-term plan to put HVAC systems in our schools, but I'm talking about what's going to happen on the first day of school when my children are going to be hot. And so I said, you know, I needed a fan in my classroom. And, you know, I said that a lot of educators really like to contribute to their classrooms, but I was one of those teachers where I didn't have the resources to do that. I may have wanted to get an air conditioner in my classroom, but I couldn't afford to just go out and buy another air conditioner for my classroom. So I had to go and take my fan from home and bring it into my classroom. And that made me think, how many other educators want to make their classrooms comfortable, but they just can't afford it. They don't have the means to do things like that. And so I figured, let's do a fan drive. Let's provide the fans that we already know educators are going to have to buy anyway, because they're not going to let their children to sit in a hot room. But instead of educators having to go into their pockets, we'll be the resource. And the community the community's always talking about, how can we help the school system? We want to be involved. So I thought that was the perfect opportunity to just say, hey, we need fans. And the community responded.
Can I piggyback off of that?
Yes, please.
Being in the district for 14 years, it's been an unspoken, unwritten kind of rule that you knew you were going to teach in coats in the wintertime, and you knew you were going to burn up in the summertime. And I think it kind of speaks to what our other panelists also said about the fact that organizing has not been a focus of the previous union and also of the district. And so now we really do have an opportunity to really think about what the problems are in our district, how they're impacting our students, and how we can organize all stakeholders to really figure out real-life solutions to these problems. Because I shouldn't have taught within a coat for 13 years. I shouldn't have been sweating for 13 years. But that was what happened. And the district knew about it, and teachers, we suffered through it. But now, again, we have an opportunity to really organize and mobilize. So I'm really optimistic about what can happen.
Okay, John, the Algebra Project participated in this drive. Why?
So at the Algebra Project, our motto, our understanding is we're a youth-focused organization, nonprofit. We're about the empowerment and like the educating of young people, and under the ideal that education is constitutional right. And through like different conversations and just really like common knowledge, it's hard to learn in a city where like there's already a million obstacles and there's already a lot of outside things going on. It's hard to learn in the classroom where you're cold. It's hard to learn in the classroom where you're hot. You have to. One student has said that in one of her classrooms, they spent most of their time like fiddling with their AC, stuff like that. So it was no version where the Algebra Project didn't contribute and didn't like try to help out and promote. We had two different group of students actually come down to our office right upstairs and do videos and like little kind of like focus groups or like little awareness conversations to talk about their experiences and do them up on Facebook and different stuff like that. But it's any conversation around education we have to prioritize, especially like young people's education and having young people be a part of it. It was just like it was an easy lane to take.
Okay, there's right now apparently $3 billion of backlog repairs in the school system here in Baltimore, and it's my understanding that Governor Hogan says he's not going to raise taxes. He's not going to put any additional funding into the school system here. But a commission last year, and a commission that did a study over multiple years, the Kern report, says that the school systems in the entire state is underfunded, but in particular, the school system here in Baltimore is underfunded, and a backlog of $3 billion worth of repairs is a big problem. And so I wonder, how are you going to address it? And this is open to all three panelists. What are you going to do about it? I mean, we're starting at the bottom of a deep hole.
Well, I think the first thing is that we need to shift from listening to what the governor says to knowing what our legislative assembly thinks. Because it doesn't matter what the governor says, because we all know what the legislative process looks like. And our legislators can overturn a governor's veto. And that's where it ends. And so we need to be lobbying and organizing and figuring out what our legislators think about this issue and get their backing on this and go there and not even worry about the governor's rhetoric, because as far as I'm concerned, it's rhetoric because he doesn't have the last say. Now, additionally, I think that the Baltimore Teaches Union, student advocacy groups like Baltimore Algebra Project, we should be not on the sideline of the district, which is something that I've spoken to district officials about many times. But if we need this $3 billion, there should be a concerted effort and a collaborative effort to get the $3 billion. It shouldn't be, at this point, it feels like it's just this narrative and an excuse as to why we can't do anything, instead of it being a catalyst and a reason for why we work together to figure out how to get this money. I think that we're going to have to do a lot of lobbying. I think we're going to have to band together and be in Annapolis all session, not just one day in Annapolis, and not just when something comes up that we feel is important, but we need to have a presence there all the time. We need to be educating our community members, because if you've been in Baltimore, if I'm born and raised in Baltimore, only went to Baltimore City Public Schools, and I've been hearing the same narrative over and over again. And what I hear is, you don't value me enough to fund what I need. You don't value me enough to meet my basic needs. That's what I hear. And so we have to educate the community on, yes, that's what they're saying, but this is what we can do, and this is how we can accomplish it. Because there are a lot of people that are from Baltimore and have been living here all these years, decades, hearing the same thing, and that creates this sense of hopelessness, because all we keep hearing is, we're underfunded, we don't have enough money, we can't do anything. That is totally, we should be beyond that at this point. And I think that we need to work to get beyond that. Like, what do we do in the interim? What creative and innovative solutions can we be working on while we advocate for money? Because we cannot continue to just keep telling our children, we don't have enough money for this, we don't have enough money for that, and not telling them, but we are going to do this and this and that. So I think we need to broaden the conversation and broaden the way we see how we resolve the challenges in our district.
I would add to that, again, continue to organize and mobilize. We have the power of the ballot box, and I don't think the Baltimore Teachers Union in the past has really organized as effectively around those issues that are really important to not just teachers, but our students and our communities at large. And we haven't really done a good job of really increasing voter participation, really having a finger on the scale when it comes to who are our elected officials coming out of Baltimore, coming out of our surrounding districts in the state. And the idea that, kind of piggybacking what President Brown said, we can't go down to Annapolis that one day when everybody has their hand out asking for and begging for money. And we need to have a constant presence down in Annapolis to make sure that people understand that we're not going away until our demands are met and our schools are fully funded.
Similar to a lot of what's been said, I think it's like awareness. it's usually when we have like, or we're in spaces or rooms like, it's usually the same people, it's the same organizers, same organizations. We need like everyday people. We need everybody to come out, and that's just on the hand of the people who like are aware. You feel me? To spread the word, educate others, so that we understand the gravity. You feel me? We're not just talking about like this thing in Annapolis. Talking about like the way or like the momentum of where education is gonna go. So we gotta like pick up the groundwork and really take the responsibility of making sure that any room where I'm in, where there are young people, where I gravitize attention, I'm doing the work. I'm letting people, keeping people aware, and then making those channels and making those ways for people to, whether it's going to Annapolis or whether it's calling Annapolis or everybody sharing a post, whatever it takes, but to kind of increase the hands on deck.
Okay, y'all have to help me because I probably didn't do the research that I needed, but I was under the impression that Baltimore City taxpayers pay X amount of money to Baltimore City. Maybe that's not true, but I know they pay X amount of money somewhere. What's the relationship between what we pay and what we get back? And why can't we demand more of our taxpayer money go toward education instead of policing? I mean, a tremendous amount of our tax money goes to policing. How much of it is going to education? Can any of y'all answer that? Because that's something I didn't look into, but I'm curious. You want to start?
Well, I'm not all the way well versed in procurement and taxation, but what I do know is that a lot of taxes for local school districts come from property taxes. And unfortunately, here in Baltimore, we have about 46,000 to about 90-something thousand vacant homes, which decreases our property taxes tremendously. And so that's less money coming from our local, from Baltimore City. Now, your question was, can we ask for more? Yes, and I know some elected officials in Baltimore City do want to ask for more. I think we just have to make sure that we're helping our residents understand what that is being used for. People get really freaked out when you start talking about raising taxes because we don't eloquently communicate what those taxes are being used for. And so we have to do a better job of educating people, but we're going to have to, whether it's taxes or something, we're going to have to figure out how to create some revenue from somewhere because from my whole 37 years of living, I've been hearing us say we don't have it. So, and in my household, if you don't have it, you figure out how to get it. And so we have to figure out how to get it.
I would say we need to reprioritize. Our police department seems to be very reactive, and they have no problem with paying overtime, millions of dollars of overtime when it comes to policing, without understanding that if we do a better job of investing in our students, investing in our kids, that we can preemptively mitigate a lot of these issues that we have in our district. So I think kind of reprioritizing where the funds go. And again, having control and having our finger on the scale when it comes to who's being elected and who's making these decisions. Again, because they have no problem prioritizing policing, but our schools are consistently underfunded.
I think I think something that when we assess the problem, a lot of these issues are, people of color being disfranchised from generations, you feel me? All connecting back to slavery. And I think that if we talk about where revenue or money for education comes from, it's really what's owed to people of color, right? Because I mean, if we look at let's say we look at reparations, and we say that we have generations of people who still deserve to get reparations and get modern money. I mean, money's really in education. So in a sense, education is like a right for people of color, and that's something that we talk about at the Algebra Project with our motto, the thing we work towards is education being a constitutional right. If we practice under that ideal, then we have to find the revenue for it. We have to find the money for it.
Okay, thank you. At this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the floor up for questions. So if you got questions for anybody on the panel, if you got questions for everybody on the panel, the mic is right there. Just form a line, if you will. And we already got one person there already. You have a question.
Yeah, I didn't have a question, but I was just going to say, I just wanted to give you some numbers. You asked for some numbers.
Okay.
Around that. So Baltimore City contributes the least amount to its local school system than any school district, than any district in the state, and they only spend $19 million a year for capital improvements, which is something that people for a long time have asked the city to step up and spend more. A lot of other districts spend a lot more money, especially on facilities, and so that I wanted to give you some context for that question you asked, as well as being underfunded by the state. There's one calculation since the Thornton lawsuit in the 90s, the state had to increase funding for schools, but there's still a $3 billion gap that hasn't been paid out to city schools by the state, and that's one of the reasons the ACLU and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund is reopening that lawsuit, because that funding has never caught up, and that's why you see. And so it's, people say they're being shortchanged by the city and by the state, and that's why you see this huge gap. The studies say it's between $250 million and $400 million a year just for education spending, and then facilities are $3 billion, where there's been requests for things being fixed but haven't been fixed in the city. So just some context.
Okay, well, wait a minute. Let me just, don't leave. Let me just ask the question.
Yeah.
You say the city government itself is underfunding education in relationship to all other school districts?
Yeah, compared to other local contributions from other jurisdictions in Maryland, Baltimore City contributes some of the least amount. And they say it's because they don't have any money, but as we all know, $500 million is going to the police department alone. So there's money for police, but there's not money for schools.
Okay, did I hear you right? 19 million for school, 500 million for police?
Yeah, that's 19 million for facilities, so for buildings specifically. Yeah.
All right. Okay, so let me get some other questions in here then.
I had three very short questions, but first of all, I wanted to congratulate Ms. Brown on her election. It's a tremendous victory for not only yourself and the teachers,
Yes,
but
here,
also
here,
for
here.
the community, I believe. And so I have three short questions, and they're related to education in the school system, but not completely to what people talked about. The first is, and that is, what can those of us in the community do? We're hearing about the collection of fans, which is excellent. Is that still going on? Is there other things in the community that we can be doing to be connected in support of the teachers? Not too long ago, I was on the West Coast for the teachers' strike out there, and there was tremendous community support, and it was key in terms of the teachers winning. The second question, and the teachers' union may not have taken
wait,
position.
can I do this?
Sure.
Could you let them answer the first question, and then you ask the second, and let
You
them
sure?
answer?
Okay.
And then the third, okay?
Okay, no
All right,
problem.
can y'all answer the first question?
Well, a community can do everything and anything as far as I'm concerned. We have a person I brought him outside of the classroom to purposely work on bringing the community, parents, and educators together to work on challenges in our school system. And so we want to have a partnership. So that way, anywhere, we attack things in Baltimore City, we attack things in our school district, we support our parents. And so it's not just what can the community do for the district and for our school system, but what can we do for the community? I think that's been lost in the conversation, and that's why we don't get any traction. And so right now, one of the things that we are facing as educators is that we feel like we're not being valued, and we feel like that we're being blamed for why our schools are in the conditions that they're in. And it would be helpful for community members especially people that are educated on how districts work, on how education work, to help us push back on that narrative and help us create a narrative that we are professionals. We know what's best for our students. And if you let us do our job, we can flip these numbers around. But if we're going to, if we only are going to put the blame on teachers, and every policy and every tactic that we put in place is a means to hold educators accountable but not resource our schools, that's a problem. So we need the community to help us push back on that narrative, because that narrative is alive and is eating us up. And we need help pushing back on that narrative.
I would say that be involved in your community organizations and partner with the school system, or partner with those local schools to really help their PTAs, their student organizations, and things like that. So then have a presence. I think a lot of times when people in the community don't have students that are members of the Baltimore City Public School System, they feel a little disconnected, but get involved. This is your community too, and our students are in your communities 8 hours of every day, and so they're part of your community, and just support in that way, I think, will be important.
John?
I think it's really like in voting, and being aware of like the power you have in voting, and also being aware of like who your elected officials are, who are the people that like we want to have in office making decisions for us. I think a lot of times young people there's like a disconnect between voting, outside of just the fact that like there's like age restrictions and stuff, but there's not a connection, there's not an understanding that like the person in office, the decisions they make affect my everyday life. So whether it's my school gets X amount of money or my school doesn't get X amount of money, or if it's this is funded versus this is funded, you feel me? It's different relationships in our communities that we gotta build in the people in the community to kind of access and like use the powers that we have.
I need to add one more thing that's really important.
Okay.
When community members want to help, you need to go directly to the teacher. Do not go to the principal, do not go to the district, because there's no guarantee that it will trickle down to our classroom. So go directly to an educator. I know it sounds crazy, but that's where we are now. So please just come directly to our classrooms and ask us what we need.
Okay, your next question?
Thank you. My next question is around the school board, and I know maybe the Baltimore Teachers Union has not taken a position, or I'm not sure whether you have or you haven't, but what anybody's opinion is, and that is of an elected school board. Here in Baltimore City, we have an appointed school board, so I was wondering what people's position was on that. Can I ask the other question, Eddie? It's okay? Yes, okay.
Go ahead, I'm
I
sorry.
want to sit down. And the other question,
You make me feel
because they're
guilty.
related, but I think like each person on this panel has a different kind of view of it. And the last question I really had was what your position is on lowering the voting age to 16. I know in Tacoma Park they did that. I know personally I feel it's a good thing to empower students, so it may be more a question to the Algebra Project representative. But those were the two related to education questions, but not literally about, what's happening right now. And I want to thank Real News and Eddie Conway, who basically puts these programs on. So I'm going to sit down and, what about an elected school board, and what about lowering the voting age to 16 for young people?
Okay, somebody want to take that?
So to the question about the school board and elected officials, the Algebra Project is actually worked with the Teachers Union around having students access certain like levels of power and do different things to have students be more present in like the decision-making process. And we all know like the pros of that. Having young people, like we always say, really being in spaces where they can like access and like use their power, right? And having them be a part of, I mean, who are the people that are in school 8 hours a day, teachers and students, right? So those are the people that, and like administrators, but those are the people that we want present. Those are the people who, when we talk about like school climate and school life, we have to have young people present. So that's to that question. And the point of the voting age being lowered to 16, that's definitely something that I know the Algebra Project and different. I'm personally for it. I think that it's something that like builds upon certain skills in young people, putting them in, like kind of dropping them in the fire. Is like, these are the problems, these are things that are going on, these are things we got to be aware of. Now, like, learn about all those things, educate yourself, be educated, and then go vote, go make decisions. We can have, young people have the conversations all the time. I don't see why there's a reason why the conversations can't now transfer over to material change. I think that's all that is. I don't think there's, I think it's like naive to say that because of age, there's like a lack in understanding of issues when the issues affect those, all ages, on like a day-to-day basis.
I would
Okay.
add that I think the school district has failed our students when it comes to really empowering them and educating them about what citizenship really looks like. So with lowering the voting age, we would come with the added responsibility of actually teaching and building the capacity of what that actually means, the responsibility of what voting actually means, and really having our young people organize and mobilize. Again, I mean, I think the common thread has been across these different stakeholders is that there hasn't been a lot of organization or mobilization when it comes to certain issues when it comes to our students. And so I think that is a key item that we've been missing in our district, missing in our union, and missing for our kids. So I think if we really tackle that, we can solve a lot of problems.
Oh, but let me just, and I'll get to you in 1 minute. The school board, though, is elected, and who's monitoring that? Who's interacting with parents and teachers and students around the election of the school board? Are they the people with the power in the school system?
At this point in time, I would say no. They're appointed by the governor and I think jointly, and the mayor. So we have power at the ballot, but historically, we've had low voting numbers in Baltimore City, so we're not completely leveraging the power that we have. Again, we have young people who want to have a voice, but we don't help build their capacity with understanding how they can interact with these systems that are keeping them down. We don't give them the tools to really help them overcome these barriers that have been purposely placed in front of them. And so, yes, they're appointed by the mayor and the governor in partnership, but we control who's in the governor house. We control who's at the mayor's table, and we haven't done a good enough job of really leveraging the opportunities that have been placed in front of us.
So I would just add that, I haven't surveyed the membership on what they think, so I won't take a position on appointed versus elected because that comes from my membership. And right now, I know my membership is split on that issue, but here's what I know my membership is not split on. Whether it's an appointed or an elected school board, we have to do a better job of stacking the deck. So right now, it's appointed, and there's a position open. How many people in here know that there's a position open right now, or have applied for it, or have asked someone else to apply for it? And so we know that out of those people that apply, 3 of those people are going to go before this community panel that we get to have union representation on. And then that community panel sends 3 people to the mayor. So we should be working on making sure each one of those 3 people are people we want. So that way, no matter which person the mayor chooses, we already stacked the deck. And that's the same thing with an elected school board. So I think the conversation extends beyond whether it's appointed or elected. What we need to be talking about is what we're going to do regardless of what the situation is, and how do we make sure the right people are in those seats.
A quick clarification. As of 2 years ago, the mayor now has the power to appoint all of the school board members. So that's in the mayor's purview now.
The mayor, Jack Young, right? Okay, all right. Next question.
I want to make a comment about this public schools and ask what the panelists think. In my opinion, if you had to narrow it down to 2 words about what's wrong with the city schools, I would say institutional racism. If we go back to the period of time before Martin Luther King was killed and the city schools were predominantly white, at that time the city spent between 20% and 40% of its budget on education. Today they spend about 11%. After King was assassinated and the student population shifted by the early 70s to a predominantly black student body, we went from near the top in the state in money per student. We were 4th, I think, in the state. And over a very rapid period of time, we went to almost the bottom, which was 21st out of 24 school districts in the state. And we were underfunded like that for decades. And then the Thornton Commission came along, which is the precursor to the current Kerwin Commission. And the Thornton Commission says we have to honor the state constitution, we have to have a thorough and efficient education, and we need, I forget the word they use, basic provision of educational needs. It's some word out of the Constitution. But they didn't even achieve equality in funding per student around the state. But I would argue that if we look at the history of education and racism in the country and looking at it more broadly than just the city, for the first 250 years in this part of the world, it was illegal for black folks to learn to read and write. 250 years. And then that was followed by many years of separate and unequal. And then there was the ruling in 1954 by the Brown decision that the schools have to be integrated. But ever since then, we've had the inequality of underfunding in predominantly black and Latino school districts. So without interruption, for over 400 years, we've had institutional racism dictating an inferior education for people of color in the United States. So when it comes to the commission, the older commission and the new Kerwin Commission, if anyone really wants to change the nature of education and equalize it, we really have to have preferential resources and preferential funding for school districts that are peopled primarily by people of color to overcome all that inadequacy for those many centuries. I don't want to exaggerate, for a number of centuries. So that's one aspect. One more thing about racism in the city schools. I would argue that outside of a few schools, we basically have a system of educational genocide. And in Baltimore, the majority of jobs are unskilled and low paid. And the businesses that hire people to be unskilled and low paid actually have their interests served by the schools being rotten, because it means a large number of students come out and they don't have the training to do anything but low-skilled, low-wage work. And that means if they're competing for those jobs, it drives the wage level down and it maintains a system of racist, low-wage employment here in the city. And I think this school system, the worse it is, the better it serves the needs of some of the businesses in this area. Unfortunately, that's the reality of the system we live under. So all these are elements of racism which I think are really at the heart of what's wrong with the city schools. And I just want to ask the panelists, what their thoughts are on that.
You already know we agree, okay? that's the problem with our whole country. But I think that so here's where the rubber really meets the road, because Sharon asked, what can the community do? That whole history lesson Bill just gave, our kids don't get. Because once you get to middle school on up, now your principal decides, do they hire a science teacher or do they hire a social studies teacher? Or how about I have the science teacher teach science and social studies? Or how about I have the social studies teacher teach social studies and science? And somehow that's supposed to give our students the same education as every other student in the world that actually has a whole science teacher or a whole social studies teacher. And so, yes, that's exactly what the problem is. But because we don't even have things as simple as a social studies teachers in our school, our students aren't even learning that narrative or learning about institutional racism or any of these things, because we're not doing things as simple as making sure our schools have a social studies teacher, and that's because of institutional racism, because we are in a state, well, we've always been in a state, as far as I'm concerned, that we don't value the black body. And wherever a lot of black people are, you don't get as much as everyone else. And another way the community can help shift the narrative is that Kerwin and all its funding is always tied to poverty, because somehow we've got it in our mind that black people are poor. And instead of us just saying we need to do this for black people, because we know historically, like John has said, we have totally disenfranchised black people for all these years. We get in our comfort zones, and then we start trying to figure out these formulas and how poverty can be the denominator for how we distribute funds. And then we get into constitutional law about how, oh, you can't make race be the reason why you're doing this and doing that. And so we need the community to help push back on those type of narratives. And if this is about black children, say it's about black children and stop falling into this trap of, oh, well, let's talk about poverty. Let's talk about black and brown children. Let's talk about, no, because talking about poverty and black people and talking about black and brown people, it always waters down what's happening to black people. And so, yes, that's an issue. But what I would ask is, do we really have the courage to bring it up and to have the necessary conversations and push back on this poverty narrative that's being pushed our way? And make sure that our students have a social studies teacher. And so right now, you guys can be helping us by calling schools, asking the principal, who is your social studies teacher? Not who your social studies / science teacher is. Who is your social studies teacher? And ask that teacher, do you teach social studies or do you teach social studies and science? Because these are the very basic things we can do to start to chisel down on this institutional racism that Bill has brought up. Like, we have to have real solutions. And I'm telling you right now, we don't have social studies teachers. So I'm now charging the community with, what are you going to do to help us make sure we have social studies teachers?
Oh, you're good with that? What about you, John?
I mean, I think when we talk about racism in education, I think it's not, I mean, like you said, it's not a surprise, you feel me? It's by design. I think how we combat it is that we got to educate ourselves. So something that the Algebra Project does, something that, like, you know, I'm proud to have been, you know, learned, but it's a pedagogy, right? And this peer-to-peer teaching, you know, this idea of sharing education. We have a lot of black people who have PhD, have masters, and, like, go work for a company, and that talent is squandered. We go work, and that talent isn't shared, I should say. It isn't related to young people, you feel me? If we adopt a mindset of, like, teaching one another through different forms or different ways of relationships, I think we kind of combat that a little bit. But honestly, it's either in my opinion, we take over the people we take over the seats that make the decisions on our education and make the seats black, or we create our own education and we teach one another and we step out of school systems. But I think that's how you combat that. But it's not a surprise.
Next question. Bill, did that answer your question? Yeah. Okay, all right.
Okay, I just wanted to say thank you for that shout out, because I am that science teacher / social studies teacher that she was talking about, and I've complained about that a lot. I am a scientist. I have training in science. I have several years of research in science, and I felt like one of the best things I could do with that experience is actually teach science, because a lot of schools don't have science teachers who actually know the science. And I was all ready to go with my science curriculum, kind of. They didn't give me all the materials I needed, but I knew what I wanted to teach, and I was prepared to do that. And then they dropped this on me like right before I started teaching that, hey, we don't have a social studies teacher. We are going to have you, this person who has never taught anything before and has only an education in science, not education, be our social studies teacher. And I know a lot about, thank you. I know all of these issues very well. I've taught myself, but I don't have a social studies education background, and I would not be able to do justice to the entire curriculum that they would need me to teach. And I now have to make the decision between, do I want to teach them the root causes of why they don't have a real social studies teacher as their social studies education, or do I want to teach them to the standardized test that the district demands that they pass? Do I sacrifice their actual growth as human beings, or do I sacrifice their ability to get into a good high school? And either way, I still have to sacrifice half of their science curriculum. That isn't what I wanted to talk about.
Okay.
You triggered me with that social studies science thing. My real question was primarily for John, which is, today was my first day of teaching anything. How did you become activated as a young person to really want to make a change? Because a lot of these students that I've had today, they feel like there's nothing that they can do to change their situation. They know that there's something wrong, but they don't quite understand like the depth of how screwed up everything is, and they just think that they're the problem, or there's nothing that can be done. So I wanted to know like what motivated you as a person.
So, so coming up in school, elementary school, I was labeled as like a troubled student. You feel me? I was on like IEP, got like pulled out of class and all that other stuff. They put you in the class in the back of the hallway, and like you go to class with I'm gonna say the regular kids for like one class and all that other stuff. And then in about middle school, I came across this teacher who taught social studies, but taught humanities is what they called it. But the teacher was like extremely involved, and so I'm Jamaican. The teacher was also Jamaican, so that was something we shared. But it was really more so like a mentorship. The teacher kind of took me under his wing, like, listen, yo, like you're not dumb, but you're doing dumb stuff. And not only are you doing dumb stuff because it's not helping your education, but like you're doing dumb stuff because like you're like literally wasting your life. You feel me? And it kind of explained the connection and the depth of like education and life and like who I am as like a black, male and all this other stuff. And it was like fascinating. Not only was it fascinating, but it was like all this stuff was right there. You feel me? This is stuff that you see every day, and these are like the explanations behind it. So it's really, as a teacher, it's really like, yeah, teach your students and make sure like they're passing classes, but also like you have to invest in them, because he just had to wanted to do that. I didn't go seek him and be like, hey, put me on, you feel me, like train me or whatever. You feel me? He kind of sought me out, like these are things I see in you that I think you have to offer, your peers. And then just from there, you got to look for it. You feel me? You got to, as a student, I went to City College before I transferred over to Bard High. Well, transferred. Before I attended Bard High School, early college. But in that city, they had a group called City Block. I'm pretty sure some people, but it's like an organizing group in city, just seeking out different things like that. And from City Block, I found an algebra project. But you have to make the connection between what we know and what students see. So we know the schools are under budgeted. We know it's under budgeted because like majority of the population are students of color. They just see you can't drink from the fountain or something like that. So it's like making that connection and seeking students out.
Let me, if you don't mind, let me ask the rest of the panel, because, well, I'm 70 plus something. They're young and they're active, and I'm curious what drove y'all into activism to start becoming involved in making these changes?
I got thrown into activism through Out for Justice. I was asked, Out for Justice is an ex-offender-led organization that advocates for policies that adversely affect people with criminal records or people that were formerly incarcerated. And actually, that's how we did a lot of work together. But I was asked to be the membership development organizer, and I accepted the charge. And I pretty much learned how to organize as I was organizing. And I had to organize a very difficult population of people, because when you've been disenfranchised by the system, and now I'm asking you to advocate for laws and policies that can make your life better, that's a very difficult sell. But I liked it, and I actually loved it. I liked being able to, I liked knowing that I had the power to change something. Just bringing people together and seeing something through from the beginning to the end. And that led into a lot of different other avenues where I was working on campaign finance reform and criminal justice reform and then education reform. And I just easily learned that if you take your energy away from you doing it, but you develop other people to do it and you use that same energy to get them to do it, then that totally shifts the dynamic of what can be done. And so I just got obsessed with organizing, because I kept seeing it work and work and work. And even us running for office, people say, how did you win? We just say we organized. And I know it sounds like such a simple answer, but that's what we did. We organized.
From my perspective, piggybacking what John said, it was relationships. I met Diamante Brown, Kimberly Mooney, and some other awesome, impactful members of Be More and Seed, and they showed me that I did have a voice, that I didn't have to sit there in cold classrooms and hot classrooms, that I had a voice, that all I had to do was kind of step up and let my voice be heard. And so I think the personal touch, building relationships, that one-on-one interaction with students, with teachers, brought me to where I am now. So.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that question. Next question. That's you, sir.
Oh, thank you.
You can lift if you want to.
I'm not familiar with the machinations there. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to, fortunately, Bill brought into the conversation capitalism along with racism, and I'm really appreciative of those numbers, Bill, to juxtapose how much money we were putting forth when I was in middle school, 1968, 40% of the budget down to 11% now. But what I wanted the panel to discuss is the nexus between capitalism, racism, and education, to kind of piggyback on what Bill was talking about, because we're all aware of the pay-to-play colleges, stuff that's been going on. The rich people can get their children, like the Bushes, et cetera, into elite colleges and universities. And this also has to do with prep situations as well, as we saw with Kavanaugh, Georgetown, et cetera. And the racism thing, as it pertains to immigration, and of course we don't have any affirmative action anymore. And so I just wanted the panel to, oh, and one more thing. I came across recently, there was a mathematical algorithm that spoke to the inefficiency of our electoral systems. So if y'all are aware of that, if you could speak to that in any way, shape, or form. Thank you.
That it's all by design, kind of what Bill was saying, it's all by design. There's a prison to pipeline, or school to prison pipeline that we're all well aware of. I think it's by design. If you keep a population of people undereducated, they are more likely to be more easily controlled. You're able to keep them in low-wage jobs and control their movements, where they live, the zip codes where they live, the conditions in which they will tolerate living in. And if we think about it, people in power do not easily just give up their power. So when it comes to how we have to really be purposeful with how we want to be disruptive. We have to take back our power. because again, people in power don't want to willingly just give it up. This is by design. The issues that we have in Baltimore City, the issues that we have with black people, the institutional racism, is all combined with the inequities in the justice system, in education, in the response to the crack epidemic and the opioid epidemic, the disparities with that. It's all by design, but we can take back our power.
I think I'm preaching to the choir, but I mean, clearly there's a direct correlation between capitalism and racism. I mean, for capitalism to exist, you have to have a bottom. And unfortunately, my people have been chosen to be the bottom. Americans are going to do whatever they can, whether you're a good American or a bad American, Americans as a whole are going to do whatever they can to maintain that bottom. And so we can't talk about one without the other, because if we don't put capitalism into play, then it becomes a story about ethos. And this is not about, you're just at the bottom because I don't like you, because I just don't like you. This is about money. We're talking about a lot of money here. And when you talk about uplifting black people, you also talked about shifting the currency and where the money lies and all of those types of things. And that's really, really, really scary for white men. Let's just be very real. That's very scary for them. And like Angela said, that's not something that they're going to allow happen willingly. And so that goes back to my challenge or urgency earlier, how do we get beyond knowing that this is the issue, and when do we start, what are we going to do about it, and have those conversations and those actions that we really need to push back? Because when you're not black, speaking about things like institutional racism and capitalism and all of these isms, it's a conversation. But when you are black, we're living it every day. And it gets tiresome to talk about all the isms and what they do. I mean, what's the quote? That the oppressed don't have time to be worrying about the oppressor and teaching y'all and all that stuff. Like, and so I just think that we also have to take that into play, that at some point you have to consider the directly impacted individuals and how that re-traumatizes us over and over and over again, for us to continue to have this narrative that, oh yeah, we're in a racist society and this is the bulk of all of our problems, and then that's where the conversation ends. It needs to be, this is where we are, and if you want to go hard in the paint like John and offer a real solution and say, hey, well, let's just have our own stuff, or let's do this, or offer us some reparations, now we have a real conversation going on. But all the surface stuff up here and us being afraid to really make demands and say what we want as black people to be uplifted, that's where I'm trying to go. And like I said, capitalism and racism are directly in line with each other. But what are we going to do about it?
Okay. Next question.
So this is my first year teaching as well. I just started at the, thank you. Just started at the Baltimore School for the Arts, and one of the questions that my peers brought up in our staff meeting last week was, how do we include representation in the teachers? There's a lot of black boys that they've had a lot of difficulty working with over the past few years, but there aren't a lot of black men teaching. And I was wondering if there was anything in place, anything that people were speaking on, anything that people were actively doing to try to get people that look like them to teach them, because there's a lot of disrespect. I also went through the Baltimore City public school system, and I came out, and I'm here now. But I never saw anyone who looked like me or anyone who was actively a male role model for me. So I was wondering if there was anything in place or anything that the city was doing or anything that a teachers union was doing in order to include representation in teachers. because there is a disconnect there in terms of race.
I have two answers. So one is a short answer. Yes, there have been some things that have been being done, like the Black Teacher Retention and Recruitment Work Group, where we've worked together, the district, union people, and other community groups work together to create recommendations on how to increase Black teachers in the district and retain Black teachers in the district. However, at the same time, we continue to create policies and accept policies that have the adverse effect on those recommendations. And my larger answer would be that the way you do it is first we have to value Black men, because we can't ask them to become teachers in our classrooms and be role models if we don't even value them. And we have to value the Black boys that are already in front of us so that they actually want to grow up to be a teacher, because I don't think it's a formula. I don't think it's, if we recruit here, we're going to get all of these Black men in the classroom, and if we do this, if we treat Black men like crap, then no, we're never going to get them to come into the classroom. So one, we need to start treating our Black males like the kings they are, so that they want to even be in the presence of a classroom. But yes, there are some strategic things that are being done. Like we need to push the district to recruit from HBCUs. But at the same time, we need to make sure that our HBCUs have enough education majors that the district can recruit from. And so there's a list of ways that we can increase Black males in the classroom and Black teachers in the classroom. But I think it starts with us valuing the Black male.
Answer that question also at North Avenue, although it's not directly part of the bucket of work that I do, myself and my colleagues saw that there was a need for support when it came to conditionally certified teachers. Historically in our district, conditionally certified teachers tend to be of color, and teachers that come through other alternative programs like TFA or BCTR and UT tend to be historically white teachers. And through those alternative programs, they have a designated person who supports their ability to become standardly certified teachers and therefore can continue teaching in our district. So my colleague and I have taken it upon ourselves to try to see if we can help mitigate that situation, set up a system or a process where we can support our conditionally certified teachers with becoming standardized certified teachers, and therefore we can retain them in our district, because it makes no sense that every year we're hiring 600 plus new teachers every year because we can't retain the teachers that we have. So that's a different side of the same coin.
Is that about money also, though? I mean, you got that turnover, 600 teachers. I mean, why are they leaving like that?
I think at the end of the day, it's investment in our work conditions, investment in supporting you to become a certified, fully certified teacher. I think that that's just what's happening.
Come into the district and you get sold a whole bunch of dreams about how you can change children's lives and all of that stuff, but you're not given the resources that you need to do that. And, this goes back to the Black man, they have a very low tolerance. You're putting them in a classroom and and you're telling them you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do that. I mean, the Black male is gone, okay? He's going to go off to try to figure out what he can do. And so, we sell people dreams, and then they leave because when they realize the dream is a nightmare, because they have to watch their children suffer every day because they can't get something as simple as a book or adequate pencils or a working projector, you start to feel like you're a part of the problem. I know I started to feel like I was a part of the problem, which is one of the reasons that I ran, because I needed an outlet to feel like I could be a part of the solution. And that's a part of where that turnover comes from. No scholar, no educator wants to feel like they're contributing to the suffrage of their children.
Okay, thank you. Next. I'm sorry. Let him respond. Go ahead. Are you going to become a teacher?
A social
Okay, but go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I teach with the algebra project. I don't know if I would be a full-time teacher. I don't know. But to answer his question, I know Out for Justice does they do a mentorship, or they have two of their members that will like go in the classroom and do like a black boy training and stuff like that. It's different. I'll just speak to like it's different programs, different things that exist that will like come into the classroom and assess those things, different like outlets. And ultimately, I mean, because I've had teachers who like weren't black males that like we still could connect. You got to kind of be like a medium, let students like express themselves. You feel me? You may not necessarily be able to relate to what they're doing, but anybody can listen and anybody can make a student feel like I can talk to such and such about my situation, and we can have that, connect, and we can have that relationship, and I can present my side and they can present their side and it'll be fine. You feel me? I've had connections with white teachers. It's possible.
Okay, thank you. Next.
Good evening. Hi, my name is Zachary Dingle. I'm a social worker here in Baltimore. Like a black male social worker is like a unicorn in this industry. But I understand what the panel was talking about in terms of getting, black males in the classrooms and things of that nature. But one of the questions I want to have to ask to the panel is, we have an election coming up. What do we want to see out of our next leader as it pertains to education and some of the problems that's going on in the city right now?
I think oftentimes education is kind of like an afterthought, and it's kind of talked about as a reasoning why the demographic of like problems is that demographic. So when we say like, okay, why are all the black men being arrested? He's like, well, it's because of poor education, and then we kind of just like leave it there and we go arrest some more black dudes. You feel me? I think it has to be. I keep saying this and this because it's as important. Education has to be seen as a constitutional right. You feel me? You protect your constitutional rights, and you march and you rally and you go to the Supreme Court about your constitutional rights. I think there are pockets of people who are treating organization as a constitutional right, but it's not a widespread ideal. It's not a widespread momentum. It's not a movement yet that like, education is the answer to all these problems. And it's something that like I myself figured out during the work. I can't think of a problem or like a situation where like education can't be the solution, or like proper education can't be the solution. A couple months ago, when we talk about gun control and gun violence in our schools, a big part of that conversation was that we have people who are poorly educated, so they just like straight up leave schools. We have people who are like unengaged, so they leave schools and do other means, or like education, certain parts of like certain like sides to education. So we talk about like student support and things aren't properly funded, so we don't have students who have a place in their schools they can like express themselves, so they go do like outside things. You feel me? It's not as big of an issue. It's not being treated as big of an issue as it is, and it's just I think that's what it needs to be, a forefront in like arguments, or forefront in like campaigns and issues for a next leader. For me personally,
I think that we already mentioned some things. One, we just said that we need more money from Baltimore City to go towards our education fund. We needed to go from this 11% back towards the 40%. I think that's one thing that we've already highlighted. We need to focus on the fact that it is the schools where our black children are that are being devalued, not where poor children are. That's not interchangeable language. And I think that we need elected officials that are going to be brave about equity. We talk about equity, but everyone really is speaking equality, because people get uncomfortable when you say, I'm going to give you something, but I'm not going to give it to you because you don't need it. It sounds really good, but when it's actually happening, that's when everyone gets up in arms. That's what's going on with Kerwin right now. This jurisdiction needs this jurisdiction doesn't. But when our legislators go to that table, they're taught to fight for their constituents. It doesn't matter that their constituents doesn't need as much as the next constituency. And they don't have I don't know if it's they don't have the wherewithal, the care, or the capacity to push back and say, yo, we're good. Like, stop. Like this, we need to put these resources here because this is where the resources needs to be. But that, compromises votes. It compromises a win. And so at the end of the day, what we need is, it goes back to what I said earlier, we need people that are willing to lose for our children. So if your platform leads to our children getting more of what they need, but you lose that race, that's what we need. We need people that are willing to do things like that don't just only say things or do things because it's going to be a win for them in the end. We need to start talking about what are we willing to lose for our children, not what are we willing to gain for ourselves.
I would add one other thing too. I'm sure you can relate being a social worker, that I think the district or the city needs to address generational trauma. I don't think it's been talked about or addressed. I know there has been pockets of people who want to elevate that idea, but I think funding for that also in our school district would also be something that I would look for.
Yeah, one more thing. You shouldn't answer this question. Also, we need our basic needs met. And so we need a needs assessment, not a needs assessment from some expert at Hopkins because they thought this is what we needed. We need our own needs assessment, meaning go into the classrooms individually, do an inventory. Oh, Ms. Brown, you have encyclopedias from 1972. What do you actually do with them? Nothing. They're just on a bookshelf. Okay, so let's get you some actual books you're going to use. That type of needs assessment is not going to happen coming from a big research company or a big institution in Baltimore because they're not going to get anything from that. If they can't get anything from it, that's not where the needs assessment is going to go. So we need people that are going to be willing to go into the trenches and do a real needs assessment, classroom to classroom, and then actually have a plan based on the needs assessment. Not this big language about underfunding and Kerwin. No, I found 20 schools that don't have enough books. Let's get them books. I found 70 schools where the kids come in late every single day. How do we get them to come in early? Tell the corner store man he can't serve the kids after that. Oh, y'all want chips and juice? How about we give them a better breakfast so that way they're not going to the corner store to get the chips and the juice because they can come to school and get a good breakfast. Not a free breakfast, a good breakfast. And so we have to do very tangible things so that, like John said, our children can see we're doing things. They don't want to hear the rhetoric. They want us to do things.
Did I answer your question?
I appreciate the responses, absolutely.
Okay. Oh, that's very diplomatic.
I appreciate the response, but I can tell you, I know someone with 25 years of experience in helping people in disadvantaged communities would absolutely fight for our children. And I'll introduce you to them at some point, right? 25 years of experience of being a social worker in Baltimore City, okay? We'll talk.
Okay, that is the last. Did you have a question? Yes, you. No? Okay, that's the last question. Hopefully we started on time. We're going to end on time. This is close to 8:30. I want to thank everybody for coming. Appreciate that. And I would like for you all to thank our panel. And as a final word, I would say that we all need to get in the trenches about this education system, get behind this teachers union, and see what we can do. And don't be limited to pulling the ballot, but get out in the street and do whatever it is we need to do to help. Don't break any laws unless you're just laying on the sidewalk or something. But let's get involved. Let's get involved and see what we can do to turn this around. We got the teachers on board now. Let's get the parents on board. We got youth on board. Let's get on board and see what we can do. And see you in 2 weeks.